Hi everybody, welcome back, glad you could tune in again. We're still making our way through this great little book, Mark Horn's Solomon Says, and we're coming now to another subject which falls under this general heading of the value of learning to discipline and control, rule over our own desires as a way of fulfilling the mandate that God has given us to rule and take dominion over all creation. We come today to the subject of how we speak, how we use words. Well, the first thing you notice about this topic, which is particularly striking given that Mark has addressed this book primarily to young men who are growing up, although of course it's relevant to others as well. The first thing you notice, which is really intriguing, there are two chapters entitled Keeping Your Tongue Sheathed, Part 1 and Part 2. Probably a message there about the importance of this issue. Of course, this is an issue which is picked up elsewhere in Scripture, and perhaps most notably in the New Testament book of James. I've spoken already previously about how there are connections between the book of Proverbs and the book of Genesis. Well, there are very clear connections between the book of Proverbs and the book of James, particularly in terms of what both books say about the tongue. And if you read James chapter 3, for example, and then you look at some of the stuff in the chapters in this book, you'll see lots and lots of parallels, some of which Mark draws attention to. Just a few little glimpses into this chapter, really quite intriguing. At one point, for example, he mentions the significance of sitcoms on TV as formative influences in how we speak to one another. I was reading this thinking, where's he going with this? Well, he points out that when you watch a sitcom, what basically happens is that somebody encounters a situation in which he says something which looks like it's an off-the-cuff remark, which is witty or perhaps a sort of slightly cutting, put-down, kind of amusing for everybody else apart from whoever is the butt of the joke or whatever it is. And what's happening here is something very subtle. We are being trained in how to speak, but we are being trained in a very negative way. We are learning from watching sitcoms that the right way to speak, the admirable way to speak, the way that the heroes of the narrative speak, are with these quick, immediate, witty one-liners, which of course is a million miles away from the wise, thoughtful, considered speech that the book of Proverbs and the rest of Scripture commends. He's not saying, and I'm not suggesting, that sitcoms are all bad, but it's just worth thinking, isn't it, what kind of influence sitcoms and other forms of entertainment have sort of subconsciously on us in terms of forming how we live in the world, how we speak, what kind of temperament we aspire to. Of course, on the same kind of subject, Mark has a fair amount to say about how quickly we respond in other situations. One of the things that stands out in many conversations among Christians, which is one of the real tragedies of many conversations among Christians, is that often people speak very quickly when their emotions are running high, where there's anger or frustration. That's precisely the point, of course, at which the book of Proverbs says we ought not to speak. And the book of James echoes that sentiment. When you're feeling frustrated or irritated with somebody, that's the very last moment at which it's a good idea to give vent to ill-considered thoughts. Of course, there are circumstances in which it's appropriate to respond in those situations, but it's very easy to let your words get away from you, so to speak, and end up saying things you didn't mean to say or shouldn't have said, and, well, what's happened then? You're no longer ruling your desires, but you're being ruled by them. Finally, a few pages later in the second of these two chapters on the tongue, Mark draws attention to the art of listening well. Of course, the book of James and the book of Proverbs do this. Wisdom, you see, wisdom is not simply about knowing all the answers. So often in our culture we prize people who know all the answers or seem to have an answer to every question. That's actually not how the book of Proverbs depicts wisdom at all. The wise of heart are those who receive commandments, listen and take on board what the other people have to say. The wise of heart, Proverbs 19 verse 20, are those who listen to advice and accept instruction. Wisdom, then, isn't about having all the answers and being the first to blurt them out. Wisdom is perhaps about asking the right questions, or being the one who is most disposed to think carefully about what's being said by others. Mark even makes the point that that's a large part of what good leadership is. It's about listening to the people whom you're charged with the responsibility of leading. One of many responsibilities that young men and all of us ought to be growing more into. So some fantastic stuff in here about how we speak. Once again, encourage you to grab a hold of this book if you've not done so already. Let's read it together, and we'll have a look at the next chapter or two in the next couple of videos. God bless. Bye for now.